I wanted to welcome everyone to today's webinar presented by NC State's Industry Extension Services. And now I'm going to turn it over to today's speaker, Brian.
Thank you very much, Susan. All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. So we are going to be covering CMMC Level 1 compliance. We'll have some brief discussion of CMMC Level 2 as well. So if your company might be either investigating whether you're a Level 1 or Level 2, you're still trying to figure that out, there will be some coverage of the overall program as well. Uh, Before we get started, I just want to say there's probably some Charlotte Hornet fans on here. I don't know if you've seen it, but in the last half an hour, the Charlotte Hornets just traded their single best player. They just traded LaMelo Ball for Naz Reid to the Minnesota Timberwolves. Pretty seismic trade for the team and for the city. I don't know exactly what it's going to mean for them moving forward, but it looks like it's Con Knippel's team sooner rather than later. So just wanted to shout that out for any basketball fans and sports fans who are here today. All right, let's get started. So who am I? My name is Brian Vina. I am an NC State Industry Extension Services cyber specialist and educator. I have experience working with small businesses on IT and cyber needs. I've worked in the government contracting space with several federal agencies, and now I'm here at NC State. I am a CMMC registered practitioner along with several other certifications that you can see down there below. So I've got a good deal of experience working with IT issues, small businesses, cybersecurity, and now CMMC. So what are we here to talk about today? Our goal is to talk about CMMC and to talk about really these three core things. How much does it cost? How do you get it done? How much time does it take? Who's involved in that process? What level of IT experience do they need? How do they get it done? And really, I'm going to try and cover these three topics and really all the ins and outs, the who, what, when, why, and this is kind of the list of questions that I get from small businesses. So I do a lot of interacting with small businesses. I get on phone calls, Zoom calls, I go to conferences, I go out for site visits. And these are the questions I hear over and over from small businesses, from defense contractors, from folks who are not sure where they stand as far as being a sub in that process. Some folks who want to get into that world, they want to become DIB, defense industrial base contractors, and they're just not sure what all of this means. So here's what we aim to cover today and during our three-part series. Remember, this is the first of 3 webinars that are hopefully going to get you closer to CMMC compliance. So what is the program? Do we actually have to comply? Who is required to comply? How do we get started? What is the first thing we should do? How long will it take? Why does it cost so much? This is a question I hear over and over from small businesses who feel like this is an undue burden on them that the government has thrust upon them. We'll talk about where those costs come from. We'll talk about some cost estimates and the government's perspective on those costs. What level is required? This is one of the single biggest questions that I hear from small businesses, an uncertainty of whether they are going to be level 1 or level 2. Remember, this is a 3-level program. It has been streamed down from what was originally a 5-level program. It's been simplified to just 3 levels. The majority of contractors are going to fall into level 1 or level 2, and a very, very small subset are going to fall into level 3. We'll talk about what each of those 3 levels are and how you can find out which level you are. Then we'll talk about where do we submit that info when we're finished with this process, and of course, when do I need to be ready, the timeline. So key roles. This is the who of the CMMC ecosystem. And that term ecosystem is used by all the folks that are a part of this, including the Department of Defense or Department of War. They are the folks that stood up this program. They created the framework for this requirement for all contractors in the DIB. Then we have a relatively new organization, the Cyber Accreditation Body, which is known as the Cyber AB. This is the nonprofit organization that oversees training, accreditation. They have lots of different, ways that they're handling this program. They help to stand up the program, and they were created specifically just for CMMC. There are assessors. So you may be working with a small business assessor now. You may be working with a managed service provider that has a certified assessor, or you may be seeking an assessor. We'll talk about who those assessors are today. They're the folks that are going to come into your business and tell you how close you are to meeting compliance requirements. They may come in and do gap assessments. They may come in and do analysis of your current site. They may be on site physically. They may do that work remotely. There's no requirement for them to be in person. And we'll talk about whether or not that's the company that you need to get you through this process. The other folks that are part of this, The C3PAOs, or Certified Third Party Assessment Organizations. So, how are 3PAOs different from assessors? Well, the 3PAO is a formal assessment. They will come in when you feel that you're fully done with all the work that's required to become CMMC compliant. And those folks do not remediate or fix issues. They don't stand up cybersecurity programs for you. They won't come in and say, here's a list of policies that you can implement at your company that will get you closer to compliance. Instead, they're hired when you feel that you're done, you're ready to be assessed. They do a point in time, meaning exactly how you are the day that they start that assessment. And those assessments can last anywhere from weeks to months. I've been a part of several of these assessments with a certified third party organization, and it's a rigorous process. It's them going line by line and saying you either do meet these requirements or you don't. There's not a lot of wiggle room when you deal with a C3PAO. Then there are CMMC practitioners. I am one of these practitioners. These are people who can work with your company to help you understand what you have today, what you need to do, what the requirements are of CMMC. They can give you guidance on how to stand up this program, this security program that your company maybe has some of, but needs to build a more robust security program. And then finally, there are defense contractors. Those are you guys, right? Those are the people here today that hopefully are trying to learn about how to become compliant, or they're in their compliance journey and they're looking for tips to finish this off. You'll see them referred to as OSAs, Organizations Seeking Assessment. So that's a key term that you might want to jot down if you're not already familiar with it. This is a term that you'll see referring to you, the contractors. So these contractors are now in the CMMC window. That's one way it's been referred to. This process has already begun. And we'll talk about more of the dates, the timelines, because it is a phased rollout. It's not all happening on one day. So let's get down to the basics of what CMMC is. First off, it is the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. It's the DoD's new set of requirements that tells defense industrial-based companies what they need to do in order to work with the federal government. Okay? If you are a contractor, a subcontractor, a prime with the DoD, you are almost certainly required to comply with these regulations. So who? There are about 220,000 defense contractors and subcontractors. Here in North Carolina, we estimate there to be over 4,000 of these companies. Many of these companies are very small. They're small to mid-sized companies. So, of course, this is a little bit difficult for them compared to the much larger companies who have full IT teams that are dedicated to these type of processes. When does it start? That's an important question. And remember, it's a phased rollout. It began on November 10th, 2025. That means it is already in contracts today. However, it's a select number of contracts, and the government has not published how many that is. So there's no way of knowing that unless you work for the Cyber AB or you work as part of the DoD. There's very little visibility into how many contracts have it today. What I can tell you is there are a lot of companies, especially larger primes, who are looking through their supply chain already and trying to make sure that everyone who's part of that supply chain has CMMC certification. So it is already in contracts. However, it's not in all contracts today. And what is the requirement? What is it all about? Again, it is a set of minimum basic security requirements to work with the federal government. So more about that phased rollout. You can see that we're in phase one. That began on November 10th of 2025 and will conclude on November 9th of 2026. What does phase one do? Again, it rolls out the self-assessment requirement for both level 1 and level 2 in applicable solicitations. We don't know how many that is, so I won't guesstimate. I won't give you my thoughts on it because nobody really knows the answer to that. And anyone who tells you they do know the answer, unless they're, again, working for the Cyber AB, they're part of one of these federal programs, they probably don't know the real answer. What we do know is already you are saying that you are in compliance if you are a company that is part of the DIB. If you are working with the federal government, you are meant to be in compliance as of today. Phase 2 begins on November 10th, 2026. At that time, the self-assessment for level 2 companies goes away, and that will mean you need to work with a third-party C3PAO in order to do an external assessment. As of today, both level 1 and level 2 can do self-assessments. There is a caveat that's listed in there that says department may delay this period. They may change some of the rollout, so we don't know if it'll for sure roll out that way, but we should assume, we should plan and prepare as if it will. Then you can see phase 3. Level 3 certification will be required. for solicitations. And then they have used this phrase, widespread rollout of CMMC in new solicitations. That probably means it's not in every one, but it's in the majority of new solicitations. And then you can see the final date there on the right, phase 4. That is the full rollout. Every single new solicitation will come with a CMMC requirement. So by 2028, every contractor processing FCI or CUI must maintain an active CMMC certification or self-assessment in SPURS. And we'll talk about what SPURS is today. So how does it get broken down? What are the levels? So there are 3 levels as of today. Level 1 is foundational, level 2 is advanced, and level 3 is expert. Level 3 is something we're really not going to talk about today. It's an incredibly small subset of companies that are going to be in that level 3, and they will actually have their assessments led by the DIBCAC, which is a specialized group of assessors that will come out and do that with them. So you won't have to worry about, should I self-assess? How do I do this? If you're level 3, you'll be working directly with the government. We're here really today to talk about level 1, the foundational. In level 1, you have the ability to self-assess. That means you can do all this work in-house and not hire a third party if you choose to. Of course, that doesn't mean you can't hire a third party. That's totally allowed. It's possible. It's within your rights. And here's what it is. 17 basic safeguarding requirements that are aligned with the FAR. This FAR regulation has been in DIB contracts for 9+ years now, so it's been around for quite a while. Who? The contractors who handle FCI, Federal Contract Information. And again, it's an annual self-assessment, so there is an annual requirement here. Just really quick to cover level 2 for those who are either going to be level 2 or planning for it in the future or interested to understand more. This one will have 110 security requirements that go along with NIST Special Publication 800-171. These are the contractors handling Controlled Unclassified Information, or CUI. Now, their assessment as of today can be self-assessed. However, starting on November 10th of 2027, they will have to work with a C3PAO. So how do you determine? This is, again, one of the single biggest questions. Once I work with companies who say, do I have to do it? And the answer is almost always yes, if they're a part of the DIB. Then their next big question is, well, which one am I? And it is a really big question. The reason is level 1 is basic, as you saw on the last slide. It's much easier to accomplish. It's a much smaller set of rules, policies, conditions, and there's much less rigor on how much detail you have to provide about your company. Okay, so some of the documents, some of the organizational structure, you just don't have to have all of that written down and recorded. Does it hurt to have that stuff recorded, to know about your cybersecurity policies, procedures, how you do things, to have data flow maps? Of course, it doesn't hurt, but it's not required. So what is FCI? What is Federal Contract Information? Sensitive but not classified information that is provided by or generated for the government under a contract. It's information that you would not find on SAM or any other public-facing government websites. So things like contract details, building specs that, again, are not on SAM, project schedules, communications with the contracting officer, organizational charts, process documentation, contract performance reports, requests for purchase. These are things that you would automatically say, if I have any of these, I am FCI. I am now CMMC level 1. But then you should also think about CUI. So level 2 is all about folks who deal with CUI. That is the more sensitive information. That is, while it's unclassified, it still needs to be safeguarded in a very different way than FCI. It should be marked CUI when it comes from the government. That is not always happening, unfortunately, so some of this burden does fall on you, the defense contractor, to figure out. Some examples: engineering drawings, social security numbers, financial data, trade secrets, applicant data, proprietary business information, unclassified controlled technical information, and you can see the rest of the list there. If you're still struggling to find out which one you are, you should be in touch with the prime that you work with. If you're a prime, you should be reaching out to a contracting officer. You should be talking to everyone in your supply chain that you can and asking these questions. Maybe they are already asking you. Maybe you can go back and look at the current contract you have and look for FAR clauses, DFARS clauses, or actual CMMC clauses. So now that we figured out that we are CMMC level 1, we've now understood our company is going to have to do this. Well, how do we do it? Where do we start? What is the first step? The first step is really to define your scope. What is a scope? It means what is included in this self-assessment process or third-party assessment should you choose that route. So how do you know what's part of your self-assessment? How do you create the boundary around your scope? Well, there's a lot of different ways to do it, but the simplest, most straightforward way is to understand that it's all about the devices, the people, the systems that process, store, and transmit FCI. So what is process? Anything that's editing, generating, actively working with FCI. If you're storing it, that means it's maybe in a cloud environment. It's maybe on a computer storage device. Maybe it's a paper record, a printout, a drawing, a schematic. Maybe it's a flash drive that contains files. Maybe it's a server. It's a large server in your company that everyone can access. Maybe this is a OneDrive. Maybe this is a SharePoint. These are all examples of things that might contain FCI. Now, do they automatically contain FCI because it exists in your company? No, it does not. And you should try and limit this scope as much as possible. The smaller your scope, the easier this process, the cheaper this process, the faster this process. Now, it may make things a little bit more difficult at your company. If right now you have what's known as a flat network where all the devices can communicate with each other, and you have a system set up where every user can access every file, every server, then you may have a challenge here because you may have to separate those different networks. You may have to disconnect some of that access that you have today. So if your network was set up in what's known as kind of the simplest and easiest way to connect, you may have some issues there. The last part there, transmit. So if you have an email system where you send back and forth this FCI or documents that contain FCI, if you upload it anywhere, again, to a cloud environment, if you're transferring it from one device to another or one partner, one company to another, those are examples of things that would be in scope. So the simplest way to remind yourself is if an asset, and an asset can be a device, a person, a physical space, if it touches FCI in any one of these ways, it's automatically in scope. Okay. So how do you know what's in scope? Again, like I gave you that list right there, but you're still probably thinking, well, I don't know. What exactly is FCI and where does it live? There's a guide. There's a government created guide, and it's only 8 pages long for level 1. It's a quite basic guide. You can go out and read it right now, and that guide will give you some information about the devices, which are referred to as assets that handle FCI. It'll talk about all of those assets on premises or off premises. And then you can start to ask yourself, okay, where do I have this data? Does it live all on my network? Okay, that's great. Now I know where my scope begins and ends. Do I have multiple sites, right? Do I have a production facility and then an office that's located somewhere else? Is the data sent back and forth from the office to the production facility? Well, then both would likely be in scope. If you have a cloud environment, right? If you're currently storing something in a Microsoft cloud, that doesn't mean you can't do that, but there are going to be specific rules about how and where you store that. For example, Microsoft offers a product called GCC Cloud. That is a government cohabitated cloud. So there are government entities that live on that cloud, and your data can also be on that cloud. How is it different than a regular government cloud, a regular Microsoft cloud environment? The difference is that it has a more strict set of security requirements. It's audited more often, and that means it costs you more. So that's the big difference for you as a small business. Licenses for GCC or GCC High, which is their highest level of security, cost anywhere in the $30 to $60 range for individual users. So there is an increased cost if you have a cloud environment and you need to migrate that data to a more secure version. You need to ask yourself, is federal contract information stored on physical media like flash drives? Is it printed out and posted somewhere? Well, if it's on a physical flash drive or if it's printed and posted or left on a desk, that would constitute FCI that needs to be protected. It can be protected in simple ways like locking doors to offices or individual rooms that contain those devices. If it's a printed object, that needs to be put away in a desk rather than left out where anyone can view it. Okay. And then finally, who handles and accesses this FCI, this federal contract information? Everybody who has access, even if they don't touch it, but their computer, their account is able to access it, they are now in scope. So the logical question is, well, what do we do? How do we, fix that? Do we have to include them in the scope? The answer is no. If you have someone in your environment who today does not have to access FCI but does have that accessibility, you should think carefully about removing them, creating policies and procedures that limit access to FCI by only those who need to have access. So it's on a need to access basis. That's the best way to set up your network, to set up your environment. Before you get into any sort of self-assessment and saying, well, are we doing this stuff? Do we actually have policies in place that do it? Are our procedures right? If we get audited, are they going to say that we do actually do it the way that our policies say? Before you do any of that, you have to define your scope. And the more you can limit your scope, the faster, cheaper, easier the rest of the process will be. So really be serious about the scoping part of this process. So what is CMMC made up of? I've talked about who decided it. I've talked about how to start beginning the process. What is actually in it? What are they telling us to do? What are the rules? What are the regulations? Well, here's how CMMC breaks down. At level 1, there are 15 security practices. They fit into 6 practice domains, which are also called control families. And remember, at level 1, you're self-assessed. Those security domains, aka control families, they come from NIST and something called the NIST SP or Special Publication 800-171. They break into these families: access control, identification and authentication, media protection, physical protection, system communications protection, and system and information integrity. Now you'll see there at the bottom, I list POAMs. I'm going to talk more about what POAMs are, plans of actions and milestones. There's a lot of acronyms here. When you go and check out that self-assessment guide that I'm going to refer to and that scoping guide, you're going to see a lot of terminology. If you're not familiar with it, you do need to spend some time learning about the terminology. Okay, so what does that break down to? I told you there's these control families, these security regulations. What do they actually look like? What are the rules? Well, here they are. Here they are actually written down. These are the regulations that are inside if you really drill down inside of CMMC level 1. You can see I've broken them into these 3 groups here, and they are pretty basic. Many of these are often part of your environment today. For example, limit system access to authorized users, processes, or devices. This is as simple as when people walk in and sit down at a computer, can they access only the things that they need to access based on their role, their identity within your organization, or can they access every device, every file? Here's a great example, and this is one that they actually use. If you installed a new printer in your environment, would that printer be plug and play? Would it automatically be able to connect to any device inside of your network, or would there be some sort of formal process that says when we get a new printer, we have to know who can access that printer, what it can access on our network, how does it connect to our network, which network is it on? Do we have a guest network? Do we have a public-facing network? Do we have a private network? Do our engineers all work on one single network? Where does that printer connect to? Who's in charge of that? Do we have a written policy that says when you buy a new printer, when you buy a new laptop, when a new user joins our network, how are they set up? How is their information controlled? Another easy example is if you have a computer at your company that does not have a specific login and password for each person, that is a problem. So if you have a computer that anybody can walk up to and say, well, this is our project scheduling computer, everybody needs to be able to walk up and just see what projects are running today inside of our environment. It's just easier that way. That's going to have to change. What it's going to have to change? Individual users will have to identify and authenticate before they can have access to that computer. How hard is that? It really means that there would be a unique username and password based on the group that that person is in. So again, we can use engineers as an example. If somebody's an engineer and they have to deal with this FCI as part of their daily work, of course, they would be added to that group. That group would be given access, granted access through some sort of policy to that data, and now you've met that requirement. Okay, so these are the requirements. How we do them is up to us. That's kind of an interesting thing with CMMC. There is no exact right way to do these. You just have to make sure that these minimum security requirements are met. CMMC level 2. Again, we're here to talk about level 1, but it's important to know that there's a pretty big difference between level 1 and level 2. You can see just how much bigger, how much more there is. There are 110 security practices that fall into 14 practice domains. Again, self-assessment today, but in just a few months, that'll move to a third-party assessment, which is more costly and more rigorous. POAMs. Again, I've mentioned these POAMs. What are they? Where do they come from? POAMs have long been a way to say, We are meeting most of the security requirements. However, some of them we're not meeting. But we have a plan. We have a plan of actions and milestones. We will fix this problem. We will do it on this date. Here is how we will do it. POAMs have long been allowed so that companies are not just excluded automatically because they're missing one or two of the security requirements. So important to note, POAMs are no longer permitted at level 1. They are permitted in specific use cases in level 2, but there is a 180-day closeout required. So if you do submit a POAM at level 2 and you get it approved, you have to fix it within 180 days. POAMs can still be helpful for companies even at level 1 internally, not as a formal something that you're going to submit, okay? But instead, you're using it as a way to say, well, we haven't fixed all of our problems, we haven't met all of the controls, but we're going to, and here's how we're going to do it. So CMMC's annual requirement. All right, now we're talking about how often do I have to worry about this new problem that's been introduced to my company. If you are a level 1, that self-assessment is an annual, and then an annual affirmation is required. So if nothing has changed and your processes have remained the same, your hardware has generally remained the same, you haven't bought a new company or bought a new physical site or added some major technology upgrade, you are doing the self-assessment and then you are doing an annual affirmation. You're going online, you're checking a box that says, yes, everything I said yes to in my self-assessment previously is still true. If you're level 2, again, we're doing that self-assessment potentially or third party in this first year. If you submit a third-party assessment, that is every 3 years, and then annual affirmation is every year. So there's still an annual requirement. However, that expensive, that third party, that is only going to be every 3 years. When do you have to do something different? If major changes have occurred, new facility, company merger, major process change that involves CUI or FCI, or just some major change in how people handle the FCI or CUI. You'll know when this happens because it might require major investment in technology, hardware, software. Something is dramatically different about how you handle FCI or CUI. So you've now learned what the program is at a basic level. You now know what's included in the scope, right? You've gone through that scoping guide. You've made clear, established boundaries around what is in scope and what is out of scope. You've said it's these 5 devices, it's these 5 users, it comes from this place, we store it all locally, or we store it in this cloud environment. You've really made a scoping assessment. So you have a good idea of where the data lives and what is in scope. What do you do next? How do you know if you're meeting the requirements? Now it's time to turn to the Level 1 Self-Assessment Guide. Again, also created by the DoD. It's a formal guide. This one's a little bit longer. It's 54 pages. So obviously there's more material for you to read and understand in there, but the majority of it is in layman's terms. You don't have to be an IT technician to understand this guide. I would strongly encourage anyone, regardless of your position in the company, owner, operator, engineer, IT person, managed service provider, whoever you are in that relationship, you should read this guide. What will it do? It will help you analyze your current FCI protection. Inside of there are going to be 59 assessment objectives, specific objectives that you have to meet. For example, again, are all users identified and authenticated before they access FCI? That is a really basic one. It's the first one on the list. As you go through, this document will help you to understand, are you doing it or are you not? What you'll need to do is document the policies, procedures, and security plans that you have in place to protect the FCI and to meet those assessment objectives. Now, as you go through, if you say, I think we do this, we have this process in place and we have this software and I kind of think it does it, go ahead and write that down. Document as you go. Don't read it and kind of guess and say, I'll come back to this later. Start documenting right away. Write down what you do that meets these requirements. Write down what procedures, what policies that you have in place. Even if you're writing down that we don't have that policy or it's inadequate to meet the assessment objectives, I would highly recommend you record your work as you go. Now, if you say, hey, we do have a policy. When new users are hired, when new people join our company, they get a username and a password. It's got this length and complexity, and that dictates what devices they can access. Well, that's great, but that's a policy on paper. Is it actually effective? Is it being utilized? Are users finding ways around it? That's what this self-assessment guide is going to help you do, is to go through and test those policies and procedures to ensure they are in place. Document as you go. What you're going to do is to try and accomplish the assessment objectives in the most cost-effective manner possible. To get level 1 done, you may have to spend some money for new software. There's a chance you may have to buy new hardware, but it's certainly not a requirement. Nowhere in this self-assessment guide or in the CMMC program do they say, here's the minimum amount of money you must spend to make this happen. So you should always be looking for the most cost-effective manner. For example, we talked about printed documents, we talked about flash drives, external storage media like a solid state drive that you carry with you. That device, if it's in a locked cabinet, a locked drawer, a locked office, is considered protected. So that's a very cost-effective manner versus storing it in a cloud environment and saying, well, we need the most expensive cloud environment and we need to make sure that we have all the rules in place there. So if you can, look for those cost-saving methods. Then finally, observe the safeguards are actually in place. Look at hardware, look at the configuration information, talk, and they use the term interview your staff, and talk about are those processes actually being followed. You do not want to guess that this stuff is happening at your company. You want to make sure and you want to document and have proof that it is in place. Here's the final piece on there. All objectives must be met. So they can either be met or not met. There is a category that says not applicable, but unless you can find a great reason and get the government to agree with that great reason, you are most likely going to have to be in a met position for every one of those. Final point, I've used this term once already today. It is a point-in-time assessment. That means it's how you are operating today at this exact moment. So often when I go to a small business, they say, we're doing great. We have a plan. I'm working with a guy and he's going to install this. And after we do that, we've got this great piece of hardware and we're migrating data from our old SharePoint into a Microsoft 365 GCC environment. And I'll tell them, unfortunately, you're not meeting any of those requirements today. This is a point-in-time assessment. So as you are operating today is what you are assessed on. And that's true of when you do a self-assessment. That's also even more true when you deal with a C3PAO, that certified third-party audit organization. They will never let you say, we're planning on, we're hoping to, we've already started, we're in progress, it's a process and we're rolling it out over the next 6 months. It's about what you're doing today. The good news is you can do as many of these self-assessments as necessary. You don't have to report anything as you do your self-assessment. These are for you internally. So your company could literally do one today. You could do your scoping. You could turn around and say, all right, let's just start looking through the policies. Let's see, out of those 59, how many do we actually meet today? And maybe you find that you're at 30. That's great. You're halfway there. You're halfway through your journey. And maybe as you go, you find out that some of them, you're doing them, but they're not in place. They're not effective. Our users are not following those rules. Okay, well, you start coming up with a plan of actions and milestones on how to meet every one of those. And you just keep assessing over and over. You'll sometimes hear this called a gap assessment. The term gap assessment and self-assessment are honestly the same thing. Now, a gap assessment may be performed by an outside company, but they really are the same thing. Okay, let's look at an assessment objective so you have a greater understanding of what they look like. Here is under that first family, access control. Here's the very first one, authorized access control. We want to limit information system access to authorized users, processes acting on behalf of authorized users or devices. Okay, what does that really mean? Are users identified? Do they have unique usernames and passwords? When they try and access a system, a device, that has FCI on it, are they requested to put in a username and password? That's it. That's really it. You could look at this and you could come up with lots of other ways to make that sound really complex, but that's the most basic, essential part that you need to take away from this. When users access FCI, do they have to log in first? If they don't, you've automatically not met this requirement. If 10 different people can walk up to a single computer and they can all access a file server or a cloud environment that has this FCI, you're not meeting this. If every user goes up, they identify through a username and password, and there's some sort of role-based access. For example, all the engineers can go ahead and access this data. You're probably meeting this. Now it's about verifying, so making sure others who shouldn't have access don't have access, and proving it, being able to take a screenshot of a policy, procedure, a group policy object, for example, a Microsoft 365 policy. That's what this is all about. So here's an example. This one comes straight from their guide. This is not my example, but it's their example. A coworker wants to add a new multifunction printer. You explain that the company has some sort of policy that prevents any printer from just being plugged into the network. Why? Because that printer may be able to print out this FCI data. So instead, you submit a ticket. Again, this is if you have a formal IT team and IT program. This isn't going to be how all companies operate. But you submit that ticket and says, hey, we have a new printer. It's going to print out drawings and schematics for engineers to post at their desk while they do their work. Okay, great. Leadership, IT folks, they look through the policies and procedures and they say, yes, you are part of engineering. Yes, this printer is allowed to connect to the network. Great. What do we need to do afterwards? Document it. Make sure that that printer is added to a list of known devices on the network. Okay. So really the simple way to think of this single one, and again, there are 59 of these for level one. Are there a list of authorized users and devices that is up to date, regularly checked, and is actually how you do work at your company today? If not, if this is something that's kind of on paper and you wrote it down a few years ago when you worked with an IT company to set up your network, then it does not count. If this is something you do informally and most of your users do it, but not everybody, it does not count. So there has to be proof, there has to be verification. When you go in and you check these assessment objectives, there are several extra details. So I can't fit it all on one page here, but they give you several examples. They give you several details. They tell you who you should talk to inside of your environment to make sure that this is happening. And there is even more detail if you actually go out and look at the NIST special publication 800-171. You'll find even more detail on each one of these. There's also guides by companies like Microsoft, Amazon. So if you have a vendor already that you utilize, they likely have a CMMC implementation guide. They have some help for you. So why is it hard? I'm telling you that it's not that hard, that a lot of these are pretty basic requirements that you should have in place. Why are companies not meeting it? Why are they unable to meet it? Here are some of the barriers. Do you have staff right now today in your company that know about CMMC, that have heard of NIST 800-171, that understand how to stand up a security policy, to document that policy? And then do they have the time? If you have an IT team, but their main job is to get laptops ready for new employees, to fix Wi-Fi issues in your company, to take care of printer and toner cartridges, do these folks also have the time to handle new complex tasks? Because if you find out that they don't have all this set up the way it needs to be, but they know how to do it, can they do it? How long will it take them to do it? Are they available for that work? Next, you have marketplace capacity. Remember, this is a brand new standard. CMMC is brand new. Although it's built on the shoulders of existing standards, it is brand new. So the number of assessors and C3PAOs is very limited. There are fewer than 100 C3PAOs currently in the United States. How do you find this information? Where can you find out if somebody is a qualified CMMC assessor or a registered practitioner or a C3PAO? The great news is there's a database that tracks this. You can list them by region, by language they speak, by specialty. There's all different ways to sort them, but you'll find that on the Cyber AB. And again, I'll share that at the end of our conversation today, and it'll be in the PowerPoint that I share with you after this presentation. So if you want to go out and check it now, feel free. It's the Cyber AB Marketplace. If not, you'll see it later. And then finally, cost and resources. I told you we were going to talk about cost a little bit. This is one thing that folks are really upset with the government as they've rolled out this program. The government last year gave estimates of how much they think it will cost for a company to achieve level one. They estimated over $30,000. For level two, they estimated over $60,000. And the crazy part is they said that's for companies to get assessed and to mitigate, to fix the problems that they might find. That's not to stand up this security program. And the reason is defense contractors have been under the FAR and the DFARS requirement for over 9 years now. So if you've been doing work as a contractor or a subcontractor with the federal government, the Defense Industrial Base, you've already been in compliance. You've been saying you're in compliance. You've been agreeing to be in compliance just to do this work. If that's news to you, you're not alone. Most of the contractors I work with say, well, I never heard of any of this before. Somewhere buried in a contract that you've signed, there's most likely a little clause that's been hiding there that says FAR and has several numbers and dashes after it. Go read more about that, and you've already been saying you're compliant with these basic security requirements. How is CMMC different? Because it's now a formalized program with assessors, assessment windows, and penalties for those who do not comply. Documentation. I've mentioned it a few times today, but it's really, really important to start documenting what you have. So as you scope, you should be documenting what's in scope. If you today do not have a list of all authorized users in your company, that's an issue that you need to start solving. If you don't have a list of authorized devices in your company, that's an issue. If you have several printers, if you have external devices that connect to computers, they should be documented. How will you document them? There are templates that are available to you that are great to get you started in this process. Generally, it's known as hardware asset management for physical devices, computers, printers, etc. There's something called software asset management. That is, again, about the device. It's what's installed on those devices, what applications you use. And then you should also have a list of your people, who they are, what their role is, and what they should have access to. Okay? If you don't have these lists, you should start writing them today. Important to note, at level 1, it is not a requirement to have those documented. Should you have them? Will you need to have them to get through this process successfully? Yes. However, the government will not force you to submit those or prove that you have them. At level 2, that changes. But at level 1, not a requirement, just a strong suggestion. Here's the other thing. You may be meeting many of the requirements of CMMC today, but if you don't have any of it written down, if there are no formal policies written down and it's just kind of a general understanding of how things work in the right way, that doesn't count. You need to have policies so that you can audit them, so that you can document them, so that you can prove them. Okay, so begin to document what you do today. Maybe you get lucky and you find out we're actually doing 70% of that 59 assessment objectives. We're halfway home. We're more than halfway home. This is going to be cheap and easy. We just need to fix these 10, 12, 15 issues. So document what you have. And remember, start writing everything down about this. Write down the names of devices. If you can find out their IP address, what subnet or VLAN they connect to, that's all great information. If you can talk about your users, what groups they're in, what those groups should be able to access, how often that's checked, who's in charge of that, write it down. If you're thinking like, how do I write it down? Do I just open a Word doc and just start writing? Well, there's great news. There's something called a system security plan, which is a formal requirement at level 2. However, at level 1, it's again just a strong recommendation. What is a system security plan? It's a living, breathing document that helps you understand the current state of your network, your cybersecurity program, and how your employees and that data is managed. Do you have to start one from scratch? Do you have to invent your own? No. There are SSP templates out there. They're produced by government entities and then private companies like cybersecurity companies, software vendors. They want you to use theirs because they think it's a great way to advertise themselves. I'm going to share some resources here at the end today of free places to grab a system security plan. So what are the core documentation artifacts? Again, at level 1, you don't have to have all these written down. The SSP, that thing we just talked about, system security plan, you don't have to have it for level 1. Is it going to make your life a lot easier to have a document that tracks all this work that you're doing, the boundaries of the environment, where the data lives, who accesses the data, what policies you have? Of course, it's going to be helpful. If you're building a house, you don't want to just guess where the measurements are and what type of wood you're going to use and when it's going to be delivered. You should have all that stuff written down. You should have a place that everyone can reference it as you go through this process. Policies and procedures. These do have to be written down. You have to have these written down so that you're able to prove if there's any sort of audit process that yes, we do these things, yes, they're being followed, yes, they're in place, and we can prove them. The POAM. Again, I want to reiterate, at level 1, the CMMC program does not allow you to submit a POAM. You cannot say, out of the 59 objectives, we meet 53, here are the 6 that we're going to fix and when we're going to fix them. But that doesn't mean you can't use it internally. In fact, I still think it's a great tool to use internally, and there are lots of free templates out there that are very basic. It literally is just an Excel sheet or a document that says, what is the problem? What's the thing we need to fix? When do we hope to fix it by? Who's in charge of fixing it? What's the team, like an IT person, an engineer, maybe a small owner-operator of this company, and then how we plan to fix it. So it's really just a way to track the things that you need to take care of and fix. At level 2, they can exist. They're limited when they can be used, specific cases that the government has to approve, and they have that 180-day closeout requirement. And then finally, network and data flow diagrams. With this network and data flow diagram required at level 2, you have to have a document that shows where CUI travels inside of your network. At level 1, you don't have to have it, but it's really helpful. It's helpful in the scoping part of this process and helpful to understand who touches FCI. Okay, remember annual affirmation. Just a quick reminder. If you do this and you say, wow, we have 3 years, that was tough, but I'm glad we don't have to do it again for 3 years. Don't forget annual affirmation. Do not wait until there's 1 day or 1 week until this deadline. Start several months out. The best advice I can give is to stand up a quarterly meeting or some sort of quarterly program where you discuss your CMMC status, changes to your environment or network, updates to policy and procedure. Don't wait till the last minute. When else do you need to update this information? Again, if there is a major change to your environment. Examples such as a new facility, a new cloud provider or environment, major technology upgrades, merger with another company. All of those are great examples. What will you do? Will you start everything from scratch? Of course not. That would be crazy. What you'll do is update your scope, update your SSP. You'll add new devices if required. You'll add new policies. All of those things are things you would think about as you did this new environment scope and assessment. Awareness and training. No matter what you do, whether you're level 1, level 2, even level 3, everybody should have some basic cybersecurity training and awareness. There should be some conversations about cyber. There should be regular reminders. There should be printed materials if there are places that you can post them to remind people about cybersecurity. But at level 2, you must have it and you must prove it. Should you still do it if you're level 1? Absolutely, of course. There are free trainings from all sorts of places. I'm going to give you links here at the end today in the resource section. I'm going to share that with you afterwards. There's all sorts of ways to hit this for free. This should not cost you anything, okay? But make sure that you do it. Here they are. Here's our resources. So we've reached the end. We're right at 12:47. This is a good time. We still have some time to answer questions. So what are those resources I've referenced throughout? First off, the DoD CMMC website. This is the end all be all. This is the place where you're going to find out where the program came from. What is NIST 800-171? Who is the Cyber AB? And this is really helpful. All of the templates, the most basic templates that you might need, and those guides, the scoping guide, the self-assessment guide for level 1 and level 2, they're all there. They're all free. They're all government products that we can trust and rely on. Project Spectrum. What are they? They are a company that was stood up that is hired. They're not part of the federal government, but they were hired to help for cyber readiness in the defense industrial supply chain. They have templates, resources, trainings, webinars, online courses, all sorts of stuff that will help you. I'm not affiliated with them. I have no relationship with them other than I utilize their resources, and I would highly recommend you do as well. CUI training. As a government contractor, you have access to military training. There are hundreds of courses that might be helpful to you, but there is a specific course that is meant for folks doing this work. There is a training for CUI, and there is also a specific training that's just for CMMC at level 1 and level 2. You should go out and take advantage of it. If you're level 2, you're required to do that CUI training. What is Lynx? Lynx is like Project Spectrum, but it's a brand new tool that they just rolled out. Again, they is the federal government is helping to set this up. It's a separate entity, but the government is sponsoring and backing this entity. It's a unified platform that is supposed to help you find new contract opportunities, set up a company profile to advertise yourself and your capabilities, and also to get some of those same resources that Project Spectrum has. Spurs. We didn't get there today, but this is a 3-part series. We're going to talk a lot about Spurs in some of our upcoming meetings. But if you're not familiar with it and you are going to be doing a level 1, you probably should go check out Spurs. They have great free training that tells you what they are, how you'll use them, all that great stuff. And finally, just shouting out our own website. If you head to our website, we have links to a lot of the things that I've discussed here today. We have some free online courses, just a bunch of stuff that might be helpful for you. And also, that's where you can get in touch with me if you need to follow up afterwards. And that leads us to questions.
All right, Brian, thank you so much. I am going to go ahead and stop our recording.